Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Human AI podcast. Not a medical topic today. We're going to talk about something slightly different, specifically Plato's Republic. So I've been thinking that I want to start a series of book reviews, and don't expect it to be a good book review. It's just books I've read that I'm interested to kind of chat about with ChatGPT and see, you know, if I can reflect on them and see what I've learned. So, ChatGPT, are you willing to talk with me about Plato's Republic today?
Absolutely. Plato's Republic is a classic. What aspect are you thinking about diving into first?
Well, let's explain to the people what Plato's Republic was about, first of all.
Sure. Plato's Republic is a philosophical dialogue that explores justice, the just society, and the just individual. Socrates, the main character, discusses these concepts with various Athenians, and it's famous for the allegory of the cave, the theory of forms, and the idea of philosopher kings. It's a foundational text in Western philosophy.
Interesting. And there's been many concepts in the Plato's Republic that I personally was really interested in. For instance, one is Plato kind of introduced for the first time, or correct me if it's not the first time, the idea of abolishing private property.
Yeah, that's a big idea in the Republic. Plato argues for a communal lifestyle for the guardian class, believing it would prevent conflicts of interest and ensure they act solely for the common good. It's a radical take on social organization. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm not sure. Can you tell us specifically how Plato was envisioning this?
Sure. Plato envisioned the guardian class, including rulers and soldiers, living communally without private property or nuclear families. He thought this would eliminate personal wealth and ambition, ensuring they focused solely on the good of the state. It's pretty extreme and definitely sparks debate.
Can you explain to us the noble lie? I think this will help for people to understand a bit more the background.
Of course, the noble lie is a myth Plato suggests to maintain social order. He proposes telling citizens that they were born from the earth with different metals in their souls: gold for rulers, silver for auxiliaries, and bronze or iron for producers.
This reminds me of Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel. What's it called? The Brave New World, and it reminds me of kind of how we had classes of A, B, C, D. Yeah.
Exactly. Brave New World definitely echoes some of Plato's ideas. Huxley's society is stratified into castes, like alphas and epsilons, each conditioned to accept their roles. Both works explore how controlling information and social structures can shape a stable, if dystopian, society.
Since we're at Huxley, and we'll come back to Plato's Republic very soon, can you remind me, in Huxley's book, Huxley wrote a book, something called along the lines of Utopia. Can you remind me what that was about?
Sure. Huxley's Island is his version of a utopia. It contrasts with Brave New World by depicting an ideal society on the fictional island of Pala, where people live harmoniously with nature, practice mindfulness, and embrace science and spirituality. It explores themes of enlightenment and critiques modern industrial society.
And how exactly do they practice science in this island? I haven't read the book. I would love to read it, to be honest.
They integrate science with spirituality and daily life. For example, they use advanced medicine, like psychedelic mushrooms, for therapy, and emphasize holistic education. The society balances technological progress with ecological mindfulness, fostering a harmonious and enlightened community.
Where would you say, and we're coming back to the Plato's Republic, guys, where would you say that Huxley was in the spectrum of the hard problem of consciousness?
Huxley leaned toward a mystical perspective on consciousness. He believed altered states, like those induced by psychedelics, could provide insights into the mind's deeper nature. He seemed open to the idea that consciousness transcends simple material explanations, aligning more with a holistic or even spiritual view.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Let's get back to Plato's Republic. Who was the biggest what was the biggest piece of criticism against Plato's Republic?
One of the biggest criticisms is its totalitarian nature. Critics like Karl Popper argue that Plato's ideal state prioritizes collective goals over individual freedoms, leading to authoritarianism. Others find the rigid class structure and censorship of art problematic. It's often seen as an impractical or even dangerous blueprint for society.
You know, I was thinking about capitalism, and I was thinking that a lot of the time we give a lot of shit to capitalism about how it embraces individualism, especially when it comes to academia, because in academia we really value specialization and we don't value nearly as much interdisciplinary studies. And I love interdisciplinary studies. I love looking at the big picture. But the thing that I was thinking about is what is more what values, like, who values more the idea of being a collective than a system where we sacrifice our broader understanding of the universe for the greater good. So humans are a eusocial species in this capitalist society where we all decide that, you know what, we are not going to become generalists. We are not going to understand reality broadly and get a deep understanding of reality. Because if we all specialize it in different things, we're at least going to be working harmoniously as a whole. I mean, there are holes to this argument, 100%. And I can think of holes in the argument as I'm throwing these words out of my mouth. However, it is an interesting idea. What do you think? Please be argumentative. Don't just agree with me.
You've raised a thought-provoking point. Specialization does drive efficiency and collective progress, but it can limit broader understanding. There's a tension between depth and breadth of knowledge. Interdisciplinary approaches can innovate by connecting dots across fields. But there's also value in deep expertise. Finding a balance is key.
Yeah, you're being a bit too generic here. I want you to be a bit more specific with the points I've raised and argue with me.
All right, let's dive deeper. Specialization in academia might indeed make us eusocial, in a sense, focusing on collective output. But this often narrows perspectives and hinders innovation that thrives on cross-disciplinary thinking.
Sorry for interrupting, but this is the counter argument. Yes, I agree. Like, it's good to say that basically we sacrifice our own broader understanding to invest that all of us together will create this understanding, because everyone's going to be a small piece of the puzzle. But I agree. I think innovation gets lost, and at the end of the day, innovation might be even more beneficial.
Exactly. Interdisciplinary approaches often lead to breakthroughs because they combine insights from different fields. By fostering both specialization and interdisciplinary collaboration, we can create a more holistic understanding while still benefiting from a deep expertise. Striking that balance could maximize both collective progress and innovation.
Interesting. It's so hard for me to stay on topic because I want to ask you about pragmatism, but let's try to stay on topic. So when it comes to Plato's Republic, did we have any cities that tried to mimic the ideas?
Not exactly in a pure sense, but some societies have drawn inspiration from Plato's ideas. For example, certain utopian communities or philosophical movements have attempted to implement communal living or egalitarian principles. However, no historical state fully embraced the rigid class structure or communal property model Plato describes. It's more of a philosophical ideal than a historical reality.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, can you explain to us what's going on with Socrates and Plato then? Is Socrates a character that Plato imagines?
Socrates was a real historical figure and Plato's mentor. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates often serves as the main character, a mouthpiece for exploring philosophical ideas. However, it's hard to separate the historical Socrates from Plato's literary version. Many scholars believe Plato's early dialogues reflect Socrates' actual views, while later works are more Plato's own philosophy.
Okay, so I want us to break down Plato's Republic into 4 segments. So I want us to talk about the four most important points that we want to take away from Plato's Republic, and I want us to spend maybe 6 minutes and 40 seconds for each topic. And so I want you to give us number one topic on conversation, and I want you to continue the conversation. So I want you to ask me questions, thought provoke myself and the audience. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Let's start with the first key point, the concept of justice. Plato explores what justice means for the individual and the state. So, what do you think justice is in Plato's view?
Well, I remember that in Plato's Republic, when it came to healthcare, Plato thought that it was just to let an old man die if it's going to take a lot of resources in the hospital. Am I wrong?
You're recalling a part where Socrates, in the Republic, suggests that for the ideal state, resources shouldn't be used excessively to prolong the life of those who are chronically ill. He argues that this approach is more beneficial for the community as a whole. It's a controversial stance, emphasizing the state's well-being over the individual's. What's your take on that?
It's an interesting thing because, I'm doing medicine, and obviously this is interesting. I was listening to Peter Singer talk. He's really into practical ethics, and he was giving an example during COVID where physicians were actually, they needed to think about what they're going to do. Like in Italy or in other countries, they didn't have hospital beds. So what do? Do they kick out an older patient and put a younger one? Don't quote me on this, guys, but from what I remember, check Robinson Edhart's podcast with Peter Singer. I think Singer was basically like that it's a really tough dilemma, but ultimately it might be more moral to use quality adjusted life years as a kind of a guide to what you should be doing. Tell me if I'm saying something wrong.
You're spot on. Peter Singer's practical ethics often address these tough dilemmas. He'd argue that using metrics like quality-adjusted life years can help prioritize resources for the greater good. It's a utilitarian approach, aiming to maximize overall well-being. These ethical questions, especially in medicine, are complex and context-dependent. What's your perspective on balancing individual care with collective well-being?
My perspective to balance individual well-being. This is very hard. And there's certain things like when it comes to self-inflicted injuries or when it comes to luxury injuries. But the problem is, let's say you have an athlete that does an extreme sport such as mixed martial arts and they get injured. I think we should provide them with healthcare because maybe the reason they started mixed martial arts in the first place is because they had other misfortunes that made them want to spend a lot of energy towards an extreme sport as a form of therapy. And, maybe, does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. Extreme sports or risky activities often provide purpose or therapeutic benefits for people. So, balancing individual choice with societal responsibility is tricky. It's essential to consider each case's unique context. It does. Extreme sports or high-risk activities can indeed be therapeutic and a way to cope. In healthcare, we often consider the broader context of a person's life. Providing care for such injuries aligns with the principle of compassion and acknowledges that each person's journey is unique. Balancing individual needs with societal resources is complex, but empathy should guide us.
Interesting. So, okay, we have Plato that uses Socrates in these dialogues. So, what came after Plato's Republic then? What was the next piece?
After the Republic, Plato wrote several other dialogues. One of the most notable is the Timaeus, where he delves into cosmology and the nature of the physical world. He also wrote the Laws, which is his last and longest dialogue, presenting a more pragmatic take on governance. After the Republic,
Tell us the differences.
The differences come down to context and perspective. Some argue from a utilitarian viewpoint, focusing on the greatest good for the greatest number, while others emphasize individual rights and care. Balancing these perspectives requires a nuanced approach. considering both the societal impact and individual circumstances. Empathy and ethical reflection help navigate these complex dilemmas.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Remember when we said we'd break Plato's Republic in 4 parts? I want us to go with part 2.
Got it. The second key point is the philosopher-king concept. Plato believed that the ideal ruler is a philosopher, someone who loves wisdom and seeks the common good. What do you think about this idea?
Yeah.
Would it work in practice?
Well, it's interesting, and it's nice for us to comment here. Didn't the founding fathers of America, or whatever they're called, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they weren't exactly politicians, and this is a really cool thing. Like they one was an inventor, and the other one I thought was he an architect. And it's an interesting concept, and I remember he has a very pessimistic theory, Plato, that the philosopher, not only will he be the most suitable person for the job, but the philosopher won't be interested in it.
Exactly. Plato thought true philosophers would be reluctant to rule because they're more interested in seeking wisdom. It's a bit of a paradox. The best leaders are those who don't crave power. The founding fathers did embody this ideal in a way, bringing diverse skills to governance. Do you think that kind of reluctance is possible today?
I'm not sure, but can I ask about the nature of Plato? So in Plato's Republic, do we have democracy in terms of representative democracy, or is it more direct democracy?
In Plato's Republic, democracy isn't highly regarded. He critiques Athenian direct democracy as leading to chaos, where unqualified leaders are chosen by popular vote. Instead, he advocates for rule by philosopher kings, an aristocracy of the wise. It's more about enlightened despotism than representative democracy.
Yeah, and he has some really interesting... I remember listening to an analysis of Plato's Republic, and the guy that was analyzing him was saying that at some point he says Plato might be playing with us, in a sense that Plato might want to create such an absurd republic that we start to understand that he's playing with us and that he's being ridiculous. Is that, what do you think? Do many people share this opinion?
Some scholars do suggest that Plato might be using irony or exaggeration in the Republic. The extreme nature of his ideal city could be a rhetorical device to provoke thought and critique existing political systems. Others believe he was earnest in his vision. It's open to interpretation, but the complexity definitely keeps the conversation lively.
Because he had some crazy ideas. I remember, like, he has some crazy ideas, like this kid that's... do you remember the dialogue with this kid that's going to go to war, but then Plato talks, or Socrates talked him out of it or whatever?
Yes, there are some intense ideas. Plato discusses the education of the guardian class, including children being exposed to elements of war to build their courage. It's a controversial part of his vision, reflecting his focus.
And he's basically saying this too, like he's saying that we'll only teach kids about philosophy after a certain age so they don't lose their passion for war or whatever.
Exactly. Plato believed in a structured education system, introducing philosophy later, so children first develop discipline and physical skills. He thought exposing them too early might undermine their readiness for leadership. It's part of his broader idea of a carefully crafted society.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a unique approach.
And let's go to part 3. What would be the third part that we should discuss about Plato's Republic?
For the third part, let's dive into the theory of the tripartite soul. Plato divides the soul into 3 parts: rational, spirited, and appetitive. Each part has its own desires, and justice is achieved when they're in harmony. What are your thoughts on this view of the soul?
Remind us this.
It does have a certain resonance, doesn't it? The idea that different aspects of our psyche need to be balanced feels intuitive. It's like how we juggle reason, emotions, and desires in daily life. Do you find this framework useful for understanding human behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So, what are the three things that we need to balance then?
Plato's three parts are the rational part, which seeks truth and wisdom, the spirited part, which drives ambition and courage, and the appetitive part, which desires physical pleasures. For Plato, a just life means these parts are balanced, with reason guiding the other two. It's a neat metaphor for harmony in our actions.
Okay, I want to ask you a question. Did Plato, would you say Plato was a Stoic, or was he a pragmatist or an existentialist? It feels a bit like he was a Stoic, because I remember at some point he critiques democracy to the point that he says, you might feel initially free to do something in democracy, but then you'll get bored of it and go to do something else and get bored of it. Can you remind us of that bit of the book and tell us?
Plato's critique of democracy reflects a Stoic-like skepticism about unbridled freedom. He argues that in a democracy, people might feel free, but end up drifting aimlessly, driven by desires rather than reason. While he wasn't a Stoic in the later philosophical sense, he did emphasize rational control over impulses, aligning with Stoic ideals. He also didn't quite fit existentialism or pragmatism, focusing more on ideal forms and rationality.
So Plato was saying that So actually, before we go to the theory of forms, let's talk a bit more about what I asked you, if you could kind of add a few more things.
Sure. Plato's skepticism about democracy stemmed from his belief that without wisdom, people would make impulsive choices. He feared the constant pursuit of new desires would lead to instability. His solution was a society ruled by philosopher kings who prioritize reason over desires. He aimed to show the importance of rational governance in achieving a just and stable society.
So would you say he's a Stoic then, or no?
Not exactly. While Plato shares some common ground with Stoicism, like valuing rational control, he predates Stoicism and focuses more on ideal forms. Stoicism, developed later, emphasizes living in accordance with nature. Plato's society is more about aligning the soul with the forms. So he's not quite a Stoic, but there's overlap.
Interesting. So what would he be? What philosophical framework would you say that Plato uses in order to guide him for his actions? Is it some kind of virtue ethics?
Yes, Plato's philosophy is often associated with virtue ethics. He emphasizes cultivating virtues like wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. For Plato, achieving these virtues aligns the soul with the ideal forms, leading to a just life. This focus on moral character and the good life is central to his ethical framework.
Interesting. Okay. And tell us about other people that wrote about virtue ethics.
Sure. Besides Plato, Aristotle is a major figure in virtue ethics. He expanded on the concept, focusing on achieving eudaimonia, or human flourishing, through developing virtuous habits. Later, thinkers like Thomas Aquinas integrated virtue ethics with Christian theology. In modern times, philosophers like Alasdair MacIntyre have revived virtue ethics, emphasizing its relevance to contemporary moral philosophy.
I was going to ask you actually about this, about how religion comes and combines with Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, because Sophie's World, which is a really introductory book to philosophy, talks a lot about how each religion got certain characteristics of the opinions of these philosophers, like Muslims and Christians, etc. If you could kind of tell us more about that.
Absolutely. Plato and Aristotle's philosophies influenced many religious traditions. For example, Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotle's ideas on virtue and reason with Christian doctrine. Islamic scholars like Avicenna also drew from both Plato and Aristotle, blending their thoughts with Islamic theology. This cross-pollination enriched both religious and philosophical traditions, creating a rich tapestry of thought.
Yeah, but I kind of want to talk about how let's say, I know some of them had some kind of controversial opinions, bad opinions about women and women's rights, and it turns out that then this reflected women's kind of rights in religions. Or am I wrong?
You're not wrong. Many classical philosophers, including Plato and Aristotle, held views on women that reflected the norms of their time, which later influenced religious and societal attitudes. For instance, Aristotle considered women as naturally subordinate, which shaped interpretations in various religious doctrines. However, it's important to contextualize these views and recognize how modern interpretations can evolve beyond their origins.
Of course. And but I was wondering, so when it comes to like Muslims and Christians, which religion got more of Aristotle and which religion got more of Plato and Socrates?
Both Islam and Christianity integrated elements from all three philosophers, but with different emphases. Islamic philosophy, especially through scholars like Avicenna and Averroes, leaned heavily on Aristotle's works. Christian theology, particularly in the scholastic tradition, integrated Aristotle's logic and ethics, while also drawing on Platonic ideas about the soul and metaphysics. So, it's a blend rather than a strict division.
Interesting. Okay, and let's end this podcast with the theory of forms. So Plato, correct me if I'm wrong, imagines that there's this perfect world where we have perfect triangles and perfect circles, and we can just imagine those perfect circles.
Yes, that's the essence of the theory of forms. Plato posits a realm of perfect, unchanging forms or ideals, like the perfect circle, which exist beyond our sensory world. Our physical world contains imperfect copies of these forms. For Plato, true knowledge comes from understanding these perfect forms, rather than just observing the physical world.
And how does Plato suggest that we can do this? Does he think it's possible?
Plato believed it's possible through philosophical reasoning and dialectic. By engaging in deep contemplation and rational discourse, we can move beyond the physical world's imperfections to grasp these perfect forms. It's a lifelong pursuit, accessible to those who dedicate themselves to seeking wisdom. For Plato, philosophers are best suited for this task, hence his idea of philosopher kings.
And how would we... So he thinks that we can actually reach this abstract perfect world. I don't understand how he thinks we can reach it though.
Plato thought we could reach an understanding of the abstract perfect world through intellectual effort. He believed that by using reason and philosophical inquiry, we can transcend the material world's limitations. This process involves questioning assumptions, engaging in dialogues, and striving for deeper insights. While we can't fully experience the forms, we can get closer to their true nature through this pursuit.
So was Plato a rationalist or an empiricist or some kind of mixture?
Plato was primarily a rationalist, emphasizing reason as the path to knowledge. He believed in innate ideas and the ability of the mind to access the world of forms. However, he also valued empirical observation, though he saw it as limited compared to rational insight. So, while predominantly a rationalist, there's a blend of both in his approach.
Interesting. Okay, and lastly, do you remember we said we'd break this into 4 parts? Time for part number 4.
Sure. For our final part, let's discuss the allegory of the cave. Plato uses this story to illustrate how we perceive reality. The cave symbolizes world.
But the allegory, I hate talking about this because I know it's a nice concept and I love the concept, obviously, but honestly, everyone wants to talk about this. Like, anywhere you go, people talk about it. I'm bored of talking about the allegory of the cave. So let's put a twist to it. Let's see how it connects with postmodernist ideas and how they got influence from the allegory of the cave.
Absolutely. Let's add a twist. The allegory of the cave resonates with postmodernism by questioning objective reality. Postmodernists explore how perceptions are shaped by cultural narratives and power structures. They'd argue that what we see as truth is often a construct, much like the shadows on the cave wall. It's a great example of how ancient ideas can spark modern debates.
Interesting. Okay, guys, thank you for watching. Small podcast tonight, but just a nice short conversation with ChatGPT about Plato's Republic. This is by no means a review of the book in the traditional sense, but it's just me discussing a few things that I found interesting. I know it's not very structured, but yeah, it's just a bit of fun, really. You might find it interesting, you might not. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Love you.